Hey guys, so now that I've got my Google Meet closed, I can actually go ahead and just use the camera on my laptop to film this. It's not as good a quality, but it'll get the job done, so that's the main thing. So we left off talking about the whole idea of time and how we're suddenly aware of the lens of Nick Carraway, our narrator, in this realm of perfection, in this Platonic conception. So if you look on page 88, the whole idea of this, and again, it's very important that you understand that this is an argument that Fitzgerald is making. I am presenting to you an interpretation of Fitzgerald's argument. There are tons of different ways that you can read this book. You can read it from a feminist understanding. You can read it from a historical understanding. There are different ways to read it. This is just the way that I have read it. So please don't take my interpretation as the only interpretation. And one of the most important things that you can remember is that this is an argument. And if it is an argument, then you are more than welcome to disagree with it. You should disagree with it. Debate and deliberation stir the soul of democracy. So absolutely do not feel as though I am dictating to you the way that you should feel about something that is so intrinsically part of our hearts as Americans, and that is the notion of the American dream. With that being said, on page 88, we begin to see Fitzgerald's criticism of the consumerism and capitalism and how when it infiltrates the American dream, the Platonic conception, the perfect American dream that we left Great Britain for, to come to this country to create, as far as the founding of America, and then that other immigrants left their country for and came to America in order to achieve, that when we add on to it this capitalistic Marxist understanding of success, that actually dilutes and removes it. So on page 88, it says, it's about midway down, it's the biggest paragraph on page 88. It says, "There was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gadsby's enormous house. So I stared at it like Kant at his church steeple for half an hour." So that's directly referencing Immanuel Kant, who developed his theories while staring at a church steeple. And only when a neighbor tree obscured it did he actually begin to get restless. So Kant's views were on the idea of ethics, religion, phenomenology, science, understanding reality. So that's one of the ways that you know that Fitzgerald was aware of the philosophies of the time: Immanuel Kant, Locke, obviously, and then some of the others like Plato. So when we get to that question of like, are you sure Fitzgerald really meant all this stuff when he was writing it? One, I don't find that a very interesting question. And two, this is actual proof because it talks about Immanuel Kant's cathedral. And then further on at the very bottom, the last sentence of that same paragraph, it says, "He went into immediate decline. His children sold his house with the black wreath still on the door." And then it says, and this is the most important part, and I've underlined this twice actually, "Americans, while occasionally willing to be serfs, have always been obstinate about being peasantry." So the distinction between the peasant and a serf is very small. Both terms imply a condition of servitude. One is a enforced labor, and then the other is obedience to a master. So it's like feudal times, right? So the question then becomes, and actually this has to do with another book that I'm reading right now, and this is one that my mother-in-law gave me. It's called A Well-Behaved Woman. For my feminist readers who are struggling a little bit without having any feminine voice in The Great Gatsby, this might be something that you want to accompany it just to kind of wash the palate a little bit, cleanse the palate a little bit. So this is about the Vanderbilts. And if you've ever been to the Vanderbilt mansion, then you are aware of who these guys are. So these were actually a huge family, like the Morgans and the Rockefellers and all of those. And they had a lot of money, and they actually are during the same time period. And what's interesting is that during this time period, we're creating a new America, right? We have this new vision of what America is going to be, a Platonic conception of America, the American dream, the green light, the progress that we're making, right? With that being said, the people who have a lot of money, like the Vanderbilts, oddly enough, are creating almost like a serfdom again, but like feudal times, right? So they have the very, very wealthy echelon, the top elite of people, and whether it's, you know, bourgeoisie or old money, whether it's West Egg or East Egg, there's still this element of like royalty to these people who have all of this money. And then there are the people in the Valley of the Ashes who are the serfs. So the houses and the architecture, because remember when we talk about architecture, and you know, Michel Foucault talks about this a lot too, who's a different philosopher, but again, AP Lang, AP Lit. But when we talk about the idea of architecture, architecture also frames our environment and frames our understanding of how we view the world around us. And the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and the Morgans and the like all of these people, these families that had this really wealthy money, they weren't going and creating new, novel, American-looking housing. They were recreating castles. Like if you've ever been to the Vanderbilt mansion, you've seen that it looks like a castle. It looks like a castle from Normandy, and that's why Gatsby's house is described looking like a castle, because even though we're supposed to be moving away from feudal, you know, Great Britain, from countries where people are in indentured servitude or they're in feudal times because they came to America for greater opportunity, it seems as though, especially during this time period, we're just recreating that thing all over again, using the American dream as the thing that you're shooting for. Sorry, my voice is starting to go. Okay, so while Americans may be drudges at work, they would resist being openly cast in peasant role, which immediately suggests that there are inequalities of medieval Europe, even though they're sort of being recreated through the architecture, right? And recreated through the capital system. Again, this is an argument. This is an argument that's being presented to you. Please argue against it. You should argue against it, because the flip side of the argument is this, and this is important. If we remove capitalism tomorrow, if we said capitalism isn't working, it's creating a serfdom, and it's, you know, and I'm not trying to like make it sound simplistic and to in any way, shape, or form invalidate this argument, but let's just say for a moment that we removed capitalism tomorrow. One of the questions that then arises, what do we have instead? If the American dream is no longer, I own a big house and I've got, you know, a nice car and I've got, you know, the 2.5 kids and I have this, then what is it? Right? One of the problems with the transcendental era, you know, these poets and artists that were going out and they were trying to transcend by going out into nature, was that it wasn't grounded in reality, right? You can go out and you can do that, but as we read, when we read Into the Wild, you could also die, right? So too, the reason transcendentalism didn't last was because the Civil War, because reality set in, right? You can't have transcendentalism where we're going out and we're transcending and finding the American dream is now enlightenment, the philosopher kings that Plato wanted us to have in order to have this actual democracy, a real democracy. You can't have that if you have the reality of the day-to-day situation, right? So another one of the big sort of arguments about Thoreau and Emerson and these guys is that it's very easy for you to say, oh, well, you should go out and be enlightened and sit in nature and stare at trees when you own the land that you're on or you're borrowing someone else's land. You know, what about the person that doesn't have access to that? What about the person who's just trying to go from day to day to day to day, right? So if you're interested in that argument, there's a novel by Barbara Kingsolver, and it's one of my very favorite novels of all times. It's called The Poisonwood Bible. It would be something that you would read for like AP Lit, and it talks about the fact that like in the Amazon, they don't have time to sit around and, you know, have philosophy discussions, because you know what? They're just trying to live. So there's the other aspect of it, is if we remove that capitalist mindset of like, go and work and do all of the things that you need to do in order to get this particular thing, what's left? You still got to eat. You still got to have a house. You still have to have safety. You still have to have those things. So how do we get them? How do we create this idea of equality if all we're doing is we're going back to Hobbesian notions of, you know, like this savage world, you know? I mean, go back and read Hobbes and read Locke and read Rousseau and see what their arguments are, and don't take Fitzgerald's argument as the only argument. Like, argue against him. Okay, so anyway, moving on. On page 89, again going to this idea of the Platonic conception of the self, it says he literally glowed. Without a word or gesture of exultation, a new well-being radiated from him and filled the little room. So the fact that he's glowing, right, is this idea of him being reborn. So he is now living the Platonic conception of himself, right? And then it goes down further and it says, has it, when he realized that what I was talking about, that was the Winkle Bells of sunshine. So it's like this childish synesthesia. Remember we talked about synesthesia before, and that's where you can like see sound or like smell emotion. So it's this crossing over of different ways of understanding the five senses, which again goes back to that epistemological understanding that Immanuel Kant and Plato and Socrates all argued against. How do we know what is what we know? How do we know what is real and what is not real? How do we know that we even know that, right? So if our senses are crossing over, and it's difficult for me to kind of explain this to you guys via video, because what I would normally do is I would have us do like a learning exercise with it. Maybe we'll try doing like a Zoom session next week and just to try it out. And then it says, what do you think of that? It stopped raining. I'm glad, Jay. So Daisy recognizes that it's not James Gatz, that this is Jay Gatsby. So she's accepting him and his new identity and in this role. Okay. So on the next page, on page 90, we get this whole construct of the house itself and how they're viewing the house. So on page 90 at the bottom, they're looking at the house, and Gatsby's like, oh, that's my house, right? So they look over at it, and Daisy's like, oh my gosh, that huge place over there. And then the last paragraph on page 90, it says, instead of taking the shortcut along the Sound, we went down the road and entered by the big postern. With enchanting murmurs, Daisy admired this aspect of and noticed the adjective that he uses, feudal silhouette against the sky. So Gatsby is trying to recreate himself in the image of a European aristocrat. So he's importing his shorts from England. He decorates his house with Marie Antoinette music rooms, right? And restoration salons, these very European notions. And it says, quote, in the style of the French and English royalty, and has and he's got like a replica of, quote, the Merton College Library, which is from Oxford University. So he's trying to recreate these English notions, these feudal notions. And guys, I'm reading this, and it's historical fiction, but that's exactly what they did. Like the Vanderbilts did it, the Rockefellers did it, is they were trying to recreate these British notions of what royalty was, which is ironic because they're recreating it within the American dream. So it's like, wait a minute. So again, going back to the idea of the pendulum swinging, now we've swung all the way back to feudal England, right? We're out of the cave and we're making democracy and it's going to be a brand new form of government. No. By brand new form of government, what we actually mean is that it's very similar to feudal England. Whoops. Right? So it's interesting, and again, this is an argument that Fitzgerald's making, it's interesting that they're recreating it, right? The very last part, though, and this is at the top of page 91, the very last sentence, we get a little bit of truth, right? So good old Owl Eyes sort of sticks his beak back into there, right? And we sort of hear his ghostly laughter sort of tinkling off. So it's like there's truth in there somewhere. It's just being sort of hidden, okay? It's a ghost, the ghost in the machine, if you will, all right? And then in the next paragraph, we see Klipspringer again, right? And he comes out and he basically is forced to drink and play, right? So he is supposed to represent the sort of backdrop of this unreal reality. So it's like Gatsby, he's gone away from the Garden of Eden, and now we're in this like castle, and he's got this moment with Daisy, and he's staring at her, and this is on page 91. He had once ceased looking at Daisy, and I think he revalued everything in his house according to the measure of response it drew from her well-loved eyes. So for him, the way that she views the house is the way that he values himself now, because she's the Platonic conception. So she's the Platonic conception, then that means that she is the American dream. And then he says to Caraway, "It's the funniest thing, old sport," he said hilariously. "I can't, when I try to," so he's trying to speak, like he's trying to explain how he's feeling, but he can't, because when you're thinking in dream terms, you can't put it into actual words. Like language kind of fails you. All right, page 92, at the top of 92, it says, "The joy he was consumed with wonder at her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwound clock. Time is becoming frenzied. Time is becoming, because it's starting to go, remember at first it was stopped, right? And now it's starting to go. And now it's going faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Okay, so again, we're doing that Proustian metaphor, that slip, because Fitzgerald wants to remind you that your narrator is there and you are watching what feels like an unreal dreamlike scene, but you are limited by your experience. Okay, so he's making the same argument that Immanuel Kant made. Okay. We go through and there are these references to like lavender and orange and coral and apple green. And this is in Baz Luhrmann. This is the scene where Daisy is laying on the bed and she's throwing the shirts up in the air. This is one of those scenes where Baz Luhrmann tries very, very hard to get across the tone. And I think he's able to hint at the tone that's expressed in the book, but the meaning of the passage is lost unless you go back and read the actual passage. So the passage is, "He took out a pile of shirts and began throwing them one by one before us. Shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in many-colored disarray. While we admired, he brought more, and the soft heap mounted higher. Shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids and coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange, with monograms of Indian blue. Suddenly, with a strained sound, Daisy bent her head to the shirt and began to cry stormily." Remember, when there's a storm, that means something bad is coming, even if it's used as a participle. "They're such beautiful shirts," she sobbed, and her voice muffled in thick folds. "It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before." In the movie, when Daisy says this, it seems to be disconnected. And the reason that it seems to be disconnected is because the rest of the context of the chapter is linguistic. And you need the language. You need the physical language in front of you. So the first thing that you need to know is that she's showing deeper emotions, right? Normally she's got a facade. Normally she's a cool girl, right? She's all flitty and siren-like, but these are actual emotions. So she's weeping over the past. And the shirts that he's throwing up in the air, they're supposed to represent all of the beauty that he's presenting to her because they're fancy and that they are an imitation of nature, right? Lavender, coral, apple green, Indian blue. So it's supposed to look like nature, but it's not real. None of it's real. And so Daisy is weeping over the fact that Gatsby's dream is beautiful, but she knows it's not real. She knows that he's done all of this for her and that he wants more than anything for her to be the love of his life. But at this moment, in just a moment, just this moment, she realizes that it's not real. She's going to deny it in a minute too. She's going to be like, no. And she's going to deny it. But in that moment, the desire for her is obscured with attaining her. So next paragraph. "After the house, we were to see the grounds and the swimming pool and the hydroplane and the midsummer flowers, but outside Gadsby's window, it began to rain again." So again, baptism, right? So we stood in a row looking at the corrugated surface of the Sound. "If it wasn't for the mist, we could see your home across the bay," said Gadsby. Important sentence. I've underlined this one twice. "You always have a green light that burns at the end of your deck." Okay? So he is aware of the fact that the way that he is viewing the green light is Daisy, but not Daisy. It's obscured by mist. You can't see it right now. Daisy put her arm through his abruptly, but he seemed absorbed in what he just said. So he's having an epiphany, a moment of realization. Baptism, new Gadsby, right? Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. The dream is starting to corrode. The reality is beginning to set in. The conception of attaining Daisy has been achieved. He's impressed her to the point that she's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's not real. He realizes that his desire and his dream for that Daisy is not real and never will be. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video really quickly because I just got a message from a kid, and I'm going to pick it back up in a second. Okay, I'm back. All right. So we're almost done, so I'm going to go ahead and do this really quickly. This is when things start to sort of corrode for him. For me, bottom of 93, we've got those ellipses again, right? And remember, the ellipses are when we are falling into reality, non-reality. It says, yes, ... Well, I can't talk now, ... So Gatsby's wealth, and specifically where he gets his wealth, is coming back into the picture. So to be clear, at the top of 93, we watch Gatsby through Nick's eyes. We watch Gatsby have the realization that the green light, the thing that he'd been pursuing, the Daisy that he wanted, is not the Daisy of reality. This is the Daisy of reality, and oh my gosh, it's not what I thought it was. Not necessarily that he's rejecting it, but it's just not what he thought it was. Just like when you have a dream about your perfect birthday or your perfect, whatever it is, that is not going to be the reality of the situation. And at the bottom of 93, we have the linking of his dream, aka Daisy, and his money and how he got that money. And there is an implication, there is an implied, hey, this is a little shady. So it says, I can't talk now, old sport, ... I said a small town, ... He must know what a small town is, ... Well, he's no use to us if Detroit is his idea of a small town, ... He's talking about doing something illegal, okay? And those ... are us kind of going, ooh, we're only hearing one side of the argument. Ooh, that doesn't sound good. So how did he get his money? Most likely, Gatsby got his money some way illegally. Remember, alcohol is illegal at this point in time. It's everywhere when you're rich, but you're not supposed to actually have it because we're supposed to be on the moral high ground, right? So probably Gatsby got his money via bootlegging. But even if he did get his money via bootlegging, is that necessarily such a bad thing, right? It's against the law, therefore it's, it's bad. Okay, fine, but is it immoral? Like, could we make that argument that maybe it's not necessarily immoral, and if someone's giving someone a service that they require, then should we question the morality of it, or should we maybe look at the actual law and say it's an unrealistic law? Okay. So top of 94, it says, the rain was still falling, but the darkness had parted in the west, and there was a pink and golden billow of foamy clouds above the sea. Look at that, she whispered. And then after a moment, I'd like to just get one of those pink clouds and put you in it and push you around. So Daisy also desires the dream because that's not real. Then we have this whole ain't we got fun interposition. So that's an actual song. And basically what we've got is that Fitzgerald's quoting from the song to reinforce this sort of hedonistic lifestyle of the very rich, and that it can only be temporary, right? So the next verse says, times are bad and getting badder, still we have fun. There's nothing sure, the rich get richer and the poor get laid off, okay? So it's ain't we got fun right now. This is temporary. Just like the Platonic conception of Daisy, it's temporary. Just like, and again, this is an argument that Fitzgerald is making, just like when your American dream is having a big house, as soon as you get the big house, it's not big enough, you need bigger. If your American dream is having the perfect car, as soon as you get the perfect car, it's not perfect enough. You have to add a better engine, or you have to redo the upholstery, or you have to get another one, or whatever it is. It's like it's never enough. And if all we do is go towards this green light, and we see the green light, and our instinct is to go without questioning, and we don't reflect, then even when we get to where we think we want to be, the Platonic conception of that thing isn't what we thought it was going to be. It's just temporary. Just like Gatsby's understanding of Daisy, right? So when you actually go and listen, and I encourage you after this video, go and listen to the song When We Ain't Got Fun. It's ironic, right? But the rich actually use the song to show frivolity. So this is the last part, and then I'll let you guys go. So the big question is, did they have romantic relations or not? And I think that it's purposefully left unclear. So the very last note, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like on my book. It's a long one. And I'm going to read it to you. It's in green because it's a Marxist argument. American nostalgia for the hierarchical society of Europe is evident in Gatsby's mansion and its history. It has a quote-unquote feudal silhouette. The brewer who built it aspired to be a feudal lord. Feudal society seems unjust to modern democratic sensibilities, yet it is evident that in early 20th century America, wealthy individuals were keen to assert their superiority and to proclaim their status in ways that were at odds with egalitarian ideal. Remember we talked about egalitarianism when we did the federalism unit, right? When we started looking at all of those speeches and things. The characteristics and quality of feudal life was stability. Relationships between ruling classes and lords and the peasantry remains unchanged through generations. It's ironic then that a citizen in a modern capitalist state whose characteristic quality is change, dynamicism, the creation of new market and new modes of production should then, aka Gatsby, should then desire to imitate the feudal system. So, like I said, you know, it's serendipity that I'm reading this book along with the Great Gatsby, because this book talks about the same thing, is that they were these families that were basically trying to recreate a feudal system, a serf system, where the lowest working class individuals, that's the people from the Valley of Ashes, people like Tom Wilson and Myrtle, that those people were serfs to an extent. Right? And if we're talking about this brave new world, this brave new democracy, this world of being dynamic and having invention, and like this is the democratic experiment, then we shouldn't have like this idea of feudalism. So anyway, so that's the end of chapter 5. I'm glad that I didn't have to make this into 3 parts, because my goodness, this was a lot. I know it was a lot. So like I said, take this time, read. If you've got questions, the Google Meet will be open. I'll post a new video, probably not tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a grading day for me. I'll probably post chapter 6 like Wednesday or Thursday. And I will see you guys soon. I hope you're surviving and striving. Bye.